So thank you for having me. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Date of sobriety 24th of July 1993. And my home group is the Brick Lane Big Book Study in London. I'm very glad to be here. I see a couple of familiar faces. Uh, on the reading, the first, uh, after the title, the first phrase, we discovered that we received guidance. Now, to discuss that, I've got to say why I need guidance in the first place. So I need to go into my alcoholism a little bit, or nothing else will make sense. I was in a position by 1990 that I was drinking frightful quantities of alcohol, and it was having very serious effects on my physical health, my mental health, my relationships with other people, my ability to work, my ability to study, my general relationship with reality. If one is drinking too much, there are two options: moderate or stop altogether. And moderation didn't strike me as appealing, so I had stopped altogether. I started again, though, about 3 months later. Casually. I don't think I decided to give up forever. I think I decided to give up for a while and then see what happened. And that was the pattern for the next 3 years. I was labouring under the illusion that if I had a long enough break from it, when I started to drink again, I would drink differently somehow. Once I sorted out my external problems, I'd be able to drink normally. That the reason I drank so much was because of my external problems and my childhood and so on. The doctor's opinion has got a line which I think is widely misunderstood. It says it didn't satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life or were in full flight from reality or were outright mental defectives. And when I ask sponsees to say, well, what do you make of that? I say, oh, I was maladjusted to life. I was in full flight from reality. And in fact, it's saying, no, forget those. Those are not relevant here. Because there are plenty of people who are maladjusted to life. That's a very narrow technical term, but we can take that just to mean unhappy. There are lots of unhappy people in the world who do not drink excessively, in full flight from reality. That's a long way of saying mad. There are lots of people in the world who are mad, who are not alcoholic. Outright mental defectives. There are people who can't think, just don't have the ability to think rationally and reasonably. There are lots of people like that in the world who are not alcoholic. And AA has got very many people who are not particularly maladjusted to life. They're regular people. They're not neurotic. They cope. They have jobs. They have families. They're not psychotic and they're not stupid. Those three factors, unhappy, mad, and stupid, are not the reasons why I drank so much. If only that were understood, we would never again in AA try to say, I drank on feelings of ... Well, no, that's not what the book says. It's what the sort of AA culture says, but it's not what the book says. It also talks about the first drink in the same way, that the reasons we give are excuses and alibis with which we're not really satisfied. In our heart of hearts, we don't know why we do it. Now, of course, I can't. Other people may have different truths, whatever, fine. But the message of the big book, as it's actually written, I say, having read it many times, is that I don't drink because of unhappiness. I don't drink because of my childhood. I don't drink because of maladjustment to life. When I drink, I don't drink the quantities I drink for any of those reasons. And it's so interesting in the big book. There's that tiny line in the doctor's opinion where it talks about restless, irritable, and discontent. But then our main figures, that the certain American businessman, peak of physical and mental health, relapses. Jim, having a perfectly ordinary day, relapses. The man of 30, successful and happy business career, relapses. Fred, very successful at life, amazing day, relapses. The message is not you're drinking because you've got a problem. The reason I think those examples are chosen is because those cases are not confounded by all of the other mental stuff that certainly I came in with. One sees alcoholism for what it is, which is a tiny nut of insanity, which triggers me to have the first drink, and then an automated mechanism which ensures I will drink for months or years when I start to drink, as that is precisely what happened when I relapsed in 1990 and then in 1991. I was drunk on and off a long time. Um, so my alcoholism, uh, these two elements, my constitutional response to alcohol. When I have alcohol, when regular people have alcohol, it starts with the desire for a drink, and then they have the drink. The drink satisfies the desire. As an alcoholic, I can have a drink casually, not even particularly wanting a drink, but I'm given one and I drink it. And the desire follows, the craving is triggered by the drink. So it goes consumption, desire, but there's no satisfaction. Consumption, desire, consumption, desire, consumption, desire, going round and round forever. Satisfaction never comes. So it's the opposite of a regular craving. It's a very curious thing. What the book tells me is that if I've got that, I'm stuck with it. I'm going to be like that forever. This is simply how my system responds to alcohol and, FYI, some other things too. Mostly chemicals, but a couple of behaviors as well I need to be very careful about. Of course, one can't prove it oneself that one is still like that 10, 20, 30 years later. I'm 31 years sober now. I can't prove that, but unfortunately, it is proven by our peers who on occasion will relapse, and one sees that the curse is real, as it were, that when people resume drinking after a number of years, the mechanism is intact, and the mechanism does not know the person had had a spiritual awakening, that they now have sorted out their lives in substantial ways, that they no longer suffer from complex PTSD or whatever it is that was being blamed for the alcoholism. That stuff is sorted out. They have a drink, boom, it's there again. So, moderation is not an option for someone like me. Stopping altogether is the only option. Now, I was in another meeting recently where there was talk of intuition, which sounds very nice and very spiritual. And it is included, of course, in the big book. The three means by which God communicates with one are inspiration, an intuitive thought, and a decision, which is on page 86 for you page nuts. Inspiration, intuitive thought, and a decision. And that is true. Unfortunately, God is not the only entity in the universe that uses these three channels for communication. How do you think regular people get through the day? Inspiration, intuitive thought, and a decision. That's how human beings think. That's how ideas come. The fact I'm having an inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision does not mean it's right, does not mean it's good, does not mean it's come from God. If it comes from God, it'll be one of those things, but those things are not necessarily from God. I'll come to why I say that later on fully, or what one does with that information. What this means is, uh, if the higher power is speaking to me in any way, uh, the channel will be exactly the same as if the ego or the disease or alcoholism or the devil or whatever else is speaking to me. The channel is the same. Um, when I would relapse, and my first 3 years of trying to stop drinking, the first 2.5 years of those were outside AA, and the last 6 months were inside AA. Every single time I relapsed was in the form of an intuitive thought. I know I thought intuitively to myself, I'll go to the pub and I'm going to drink, and followed by a decision. What happened? I went to the pub. This means I cannot fundamentally trust the thoughts that enter my mind from my physical brain. I cannot trust that they will keep me safe. A regular person can, because regular people don't do potentially life-threatening things like resuming drinking when you're an alcoholic. They just don't do stuff like that because there is a self-protective mechanism in place which ensures that crazy thoughts get stopped at the gate. With me, nah, not the case. With alcohol, with other substances, with some other behaviors, it is the impulse to do the thing, the first drink or the whatever else, does not come with a safety warning. Um, it's almost as though every thought I've ever had is followed by a little message which says, "I'm your higher power, and I endorse this message." My uh, desires to drink always seemed to be as if from on high, exactly the same status as any other idea. I cannot protect myself from drinking through reason, through common sense, through reliance on my own self-protective mechanism because there is a hole in it. And you know what? Because it's alcoholism, not alcoholism, that hole is still there. It will always be there. There are times when the thought, especially if you're in meetings, you're talking to drunks a lot. Drinking is not a non-topic, never will be if one's attending a lot of AA. And it's not inevitable that when the thought of a drink, not the desire to have one, but merely the thoughts about drinking cross one's mind, bells don't always go off. I need something other than me to be in charge. Because me being in charge results in me periodically having a drink, and if I were to have a drink, I might never stop. So I need to be dethroned. I need to be not in charge. I need to live by something other than the thought that has just come into my mind, the impulse that has just come into my mind, because those can't be trusted. Not 100%. Which brings us to the reading. We discover that we received guidance. So this is the point. I need guidance coming from something other than me. Now, one might say, well, a sensible grown-up. Um, and AA does have some sensible grown-ups in it. But the responsibility of this is the difficulty. The responsibility for my life cannot be placed on anyone else's shoulders. And I certainly cannot take onto my shoulders the responsibility for anyone else's life. And the extrapolation of that is I can't have my life in the hands of a disparate fellowship either, where people can't agree on what biscuits they like at a meeting, how on earth, and also what does one phone the group every time one has a question, get everyone on a conference call? One can't ask the group. Well, so, in a very practical sense, the guidance cannot come from the fellowship as a whole. In other words, no human power. And anyone who's tried to rely on another human being to keep them sober, and I did in various ways before I got to AA, I thought a so-called relationship might help in this regard. Um, it didn't. It didn't. So the person that's in charge must not be me. The person that's in charge must not be another person. The person that's in charge cannot be a group of people. It cannot be the fuzzy notion of the fellowship as a whole. There's got to be something else. And the only thing on offer, it appears, is a higher power. Now, what I'm going to say is probably a little bit controversial. I'm of the view that AA works extremely well if one has a personal, direct relationship with a higher power. I've had sponsees, and I've tried it myself for many years until I caved, to have a relationship with a sort of diffuse or abstract higher power, like the spirit of the universe, or nature, or love, or something like that. And but because I didn't like the idea of a personal relationship, so I concocted some abstract notion of an energy in the universe, which is all very well until you're in serious trouble and you realize you need something to rely on and someone to talk to. And the abstract notion that there is a good energy in the universe, unless you can communicate with it directly, is of no use to man or beast, at least not for me. And I've seen countless people struggle with this as well until a personal relationship is formed. And I discovered in my case, I've seen it many times, it's not always the case. But the problem with a personal relationship, you see, I can sit there with this lovely energy of the universe flowing through all living things. Guess who's still in charge? Me. The authority problem has not been solved. My objection to the idea of a personal relationship with a higher power is one of the two has to be in charge. And if this is going to be authentic, it ain't me. I'm no longer the center of the universe. I'm no longer the great observer of this energy everywhere. I'm just a tiny cog in a very, very large mechanism. It's fundamentally degrading to the ego to have to make itself subservient to something else. That was my fundamental objection to the notion of a personal relationship with a power greater than myself, because I did not want to be dethroned. And not just dethroned, I don't then get to sit at the right hand of the Father. That job is not up for grabs. I get to live on the shop floor of the factory, a factory with 8 billion people in it. I become if I recognize God as God, a God with whom I can have a personal relationship, I become very, very small and insignificant indeed. My inability and unwillingness to face that was a block for a very, very long time. So the reading, we discover that we receive guidance. Who from? God. For our lives, for our life. You see, step 3. Um, uh, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to God. It implies each individually one's whole life. It doesn't say part of one's life. There's no restriction there. It's the whole thing. It's not, as one would sometimes think in meetings, turning over the occasional emergency to the higher power. It's the whole of one's life, which is an alarming prospect. It means my life from the moment I wake up in the morning until the moment I go to sleep at night. And then at night too. It's the whole thing. There is no moment, you can't have a moment to yourself. You see, when you really think about step 3 and its implications, no wonder people instinctively find it so disagreeable. If you take the words at face value, you've got nothing left. Everything is given over. And then one is I'm handed back a day at a time, and of that day, an hour at a time, and of that hour, a minute at a time, to dispose of, to use well, but on behalf of God, not on behalf of me. Now, what has this got to do with alcoholism? Well, very good question. What it's got to do with alcoholism, if I'm living in accordance with the system that AA presents to me in the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts, and I'm fundamentally committed day in, day out to doing the right thing rather than doing what I want, the fact that a little thought flies from my physical brain up into my mind and says, let's have a drink, is irrelevant, because those impulses and those impulses no longer are relevant in my decision-making process as to what to do. I used to live entirely by impulse. Whatever came into my mind, I did it. And what I've learned to do in AA is to just, the screen is still there with all the impulses coming in, and occasionally you look up at it and marvel at the rubbish the physical brain produces and pumps up into the mind. But it's taking that offline in the sense of that is no longer the basis on which I live. Hence, title of the reading, Foundation for Life. What is the foundation for life? The foundation for life is living by the steps, the traditions, and the concepts, which means the foundation for my day is living by the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. The first 9 steps place me in a surrendered position where I'm willing and able to actually do that in practice. And it talks in the third part of the reading about the direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. And uh, the first prayer of the day is, God, please direct my thinking. That immediately takes my mind, it disconnects my mind from the impulse system, the impulse and emotion system, and connects it to a different power source. It's like the engine of my physical brain is disconnected. It's no longer connected to the transmission. It is not what turns the wheels of the car. That's the protection from alcoholism, in my view, is living on a different system, which makes the impulses to drink now irrelevant. And that new system, first thing, God, please direct my thinking. Again, page 86, divorce my thinking from self-pity, self-seeking, and dishonest motives. And it's terribly simple. I get to go through each day having decided with the higher power, literally, what am I going to do today? God's will for me is not some great abstract notion of an outcome in 20 years' time. It's what am I going to do this morning? What am I going to do at 8 o'clock? What am I going to do at 9 o'clock? It's very banal. It's very dull. If you're looking for excitement in the AA program, you will not find it. In step 11, it's embarrassingly unambitious, praying only for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out. In other words, praying only, what does God want me to do today? Give me the strength to do it. Now that sounds as though it's leaving the field wide open for all sorts of nonsense and shenanigans, and of course it doesn't. Because we have not just steps and a personal relationship with God, but we have a fellowship and we have service. And I'd just like to inject a notion from, there was a 19th century writer and speaker who talks about the arrogance of someone who, as it were, lives in a house where they shut up the doors and the windows, but communicate with God only through a crack in the ceiling. That's not how AA works, but I don't think we're ascetics and mystics who communicate with God only directly. it's having the doors and windows wide open to have communication with lots of good people around in AA. And that good, orderly direction and common sense of AA is really what got me on the right path to start with. So this apparently wide open field of God's will for me today, you'll see pretty swiftly that 99% of that is taken up with known things, like I need to do three things every day: look after myself, fulfill my obligations, and appreciate what is there, what is given to me in my life. Looking after myself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, practically, socially, philosophically, in my case, religion is why I happen to be religious, but that's not obligatory. Morally, there are actions I need to take each day which ensure I remain on on the beam, on the straight and narrow path in each of those areas. And the knowledge of exactly how to do that, I don't need to have mystical experiences to know to brush my teeth and go and see a dental hygienist. Uh, and it's the same with the financial stuff. I'm not looking for an inspiration with ayahuasca. I need to fill in my tax return honestly with the truth and completely. It doesn't require a trip to Thailand, this. It requires common sense and practical wisdom. So looking after myself, how I've learned how to do that from people in AA who know how to look after themselves. Find people who are competent and say, I'm having trouble with my finances. Can you tell me what to do? And when they're telling you what to do, you listen, you write it down, and at the end you say thank you, and then you do it, and then you see if it works. And if it works, you go back again. Took me a long time to learn that. I thought you had to argue with them for a long time before you did what they suggested. Apparently you don't. You can actually skip the whole argument thing, um, and just try it, because you'll only find out by trying it. So looking after myself, I got to fulfill obligations. What are my obligations? The things which are there in front of me to fulfill. I was complaining when I was new that I didn't have any money, and I felt very badly about myself. And I was expecting some great wisdom and some great investigation of childhood traumas, and they didn't say. They said get a job. So I remarkably I did. I was as surprised as anyone at this response. It was the first time I'd followed an instruction in my life, I think. And I discovered two remarkable things. Number one, if I got a job, they gave me money at the end of the week. And secondly, I started to feel better about myself. Um, Fulfilling obligations. I needed to find things to do in the world to make myself useful. And I didn't have any skills when I got sober, so I buttered slices of bread somewhere. You don't need much skill to do that. You need a little, but not much. So I did that, and I got better at it and did different things, and then I learned how to do other things. There appears to be quite a lot to do in the world. I don't think there's any reason to be idle. Um, and then appreciation for what is given to me. I'm a fan of short, spontaneous gratitude lists. I think long, exhaustive, self-indulgent ones start to defeat the purpose. But to quickly jot down each day three things I appreciate, three things I'm looking forward to, finish, go and do something else. But forcing myself to do that on a daily basis, very, very helpful. So knowledge of God's will for me, particularly with the obligations, by the way, with I've been married, been with someone for poor soul for 20 years. And I've been in the same occupation for 20 odd years. And what they said to me when I was new was grow where you're planted. Stop trying to pull an external lever and making massive changes in your life based on massive realizations every time you have a feeling. And this frees up a lot of time not to have to consider every 5 minutes. Uh, the massive change I'm going to make to alter my life fundamentally. Happiness, I found, in my case, has come chiefly from adjusting myself to what is and getting on with what is in front of me and doing it to the absolute best of my ability, even if it doesn't appear to need to be done well, even if no one is watching, even if I earn less because I'm doing the work well, doesn't matter. Do it well, God will look after you. And funnily enough, by going through each day, trying to do each job as well as possible, simply for the sake of it, has saved me, I think, tens of thousands of pounds in complex professional advice. It solved almost everything. You see, you're getting money saving tips here. I mean, you spiritual coupons or coupons, as you say in America. Um, So the knowledge of God's will for me is 99.5% common sense, which can be learnt from a few good older timers in AA. No psychedelics required here. Um, the basic mechanism, though, this sort of 24-hour mechanism, there is a direct linkage between the three things. At the end of the day, and one can do this, one doesn't need to wait until one is dog tired at 11 o'clock at night. One can do this at the end of the working day. So when the obligations are done and you're going to go and run around the playground in the evening, to simply say, what went well? What went badly? What needs to change? What do I need to do differently? And my experience is if I ask God those questions, I get told immediately. I bet if I'm not asking you to do this now, but maybe when the meeting is over, um, if one were to sit down and with a pen and a piece of paper and say to God, give me 5 things in my life I need to stop doing, 5 things in my life I need to start doing, 5 things in my life I need to do differently. Within 90 seconds, you would discover enough work for 5 years of change. I don't think the problem that I've ever had is lack of information. I've known all along precisely what I need to stop doing, what I need to start doing, what I need to do differently. Not an information problem, which is why getting lost in inventory, I think, is a bit of a red herring. Um, So daily, I get to look at what needs to change, and not even necessarily in my life as a whole at that point. It's what needs to change in the next 24 hours. And I've experienced a lot of change, of course, over the last 31 years, not through the great communist, uh, the great leaps forward, but tiny little changes which over the years add up to a fundamental change in outlook and attitude and personality. On the question of so self-examination, the questions on page 86 I find entirely sufficient in terms of a daily inventory. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? It doesn't then say, please analyze these at great length, write them out, and send them to 15 people. I'm asked to observe whether these were operative or not. And if they were operative, there's a question further on, what are my corrective measures? So the inventory, the daily inventory, is an invitation to invite God, invitation to me to invite God to convey to me what needs to change in the next 24 hours. Someone said to me yesterday, do you do written step 10s? And I mentally scanned through pages 84 to 85 of the big book, which is where it explains what step 10 is. There was no mention of writing. I'm of the view, it's something I've come to relatively recently, but the more I encounter constantly situations where this principle applies, I can get the steps wrong in one of two ways. I can do less than they ask, or I can do more than they ask. Case in point, over inventory, asking from God for more than just knowledge of his will for me and the power to carry that out, trying to crack the secrets of the universe, trying to have mystical experiences. There's a Reverend Shoemaker poem called Standing by the Door, or The Door, or something like that, where he says that essentially, I won't rehearse the whole thing, but in the world of the spirit, lots of people go all the way in and have these amazing experiences, but our job is to stand by the door and help other people in. And I think that's exactly what we do in AA. I'm of the view, and there's nothing wrong with views, but as long as one knows they're merely a view, based albeit on experience, that we can lose as many people in AA out the top through spiritual woo-woo as we do out of the bottom through failing to engage in spirituality whatsoever. The one can forget very easily. This is about alcoholics coming to AA meetings and vomiting on the carpet, and we need to clean it up. Because that's the fate that awaits me if I forget that this is about alcoholism. Meditation, per the Big Book, is there are lots of words in the Big Book which mean something different, either because they're being used in a technical sense. So mental obsession is used in a technical sense. Physical craving is used in a technical sense. There are other words which simply meant something different in 1939 when the book was published than they mean today. And meditation is one of them. And there are I know people that are sterling meditators in the modern sense, people who are very accomplished Buddhists and have become teachers and whatever else, and it's a very, very good thing, admirable. But the sense, when one reads the AA literature, of what meditation is for the purposes of step 11 is essentially a period every day of concentrated, directed, quiet thought. So I think the simplest way I've heard it put is prayer is asking questions to God, and sometimes thanking and praising and so on, but chiefly asking questions. And meditation is sitting quietly and letting answers come. Now, the answers that come, I must be cautious about acting rashly based on answers that come to me spontaneously. What I'm to do is to test them against my experience, to test them against the principles of the program, of all three steps, the traditions, and the concepts. And to run, if I have a bright idea, to run the bright idea past someone else. I'm wary of input from God, which I think comes from God, which appears to let me off the hook, to let me off responsibilities, to leave me idle. I'm skeptical of input from God, which appears to involve my intervening in someone else's life. I'm skeptical of apparent intuitions from God concerning major changes. If a major change is required, it will probably still be a good idea in a year's time or 6 months' time. And it's very rare in my experience that major changes have been urgent in nature. And I've had all sorts of imaginative, dreadful word, imaginative ideas over the years. And what many years now, I've been in the habit of saying, very good, I've had a wonderful idea. I'm going to write it down, then I'm going to come back to it in 3 months' time. And in almost every single case, I've realized it would have been a catastrophe if I'd implemented that idea. Leaving relationships, leaving fellowships, leaving jobs, leaving careers. I've always been a great one in my alcoholism and my spiritual malady for adopting permanent solutions to temporary problems, making structural changes because of a feeling or a sense. So I'm a great fan of prayer and meditation and self-examination, but in the context of a fellowship of people around me who have a lot of common sense. Oh, look, time's up, so I'm going to stop. Thanks for listening.